not my involvement, because I started much earlier, but my hope that this involvement in the peace process has a serious Israeli partner. I think meeting you today here in Ramallah, in Ramadan, with all its symbolic, spiritual meanings, is to us, as my dear friend Tayyib Rahim have said, raises our morale by raising our belief that there is still an Israeli partner. I don't mean it in the Lieberman sense of the word. He decides who is his partners. But in your case, you decided by coming here. That really is the pleasure I have for having you. But I'm also very happy that Mr. Abdurrahim has given you a brief of the latest meetings and the latest developments, because that is important. I'm sure you followed this in your papers, but coming from the lion's mouth is also important. I think it, besides the good news of our being here together, I don't have very good news about my analysis of where we are, Israelis and Palestinians. And I don't think it will come as a shock to you, but I think it's very important that we together analyze. I try not to speak too much, but in order to allow as much dialogue as possible. But I thought that a very, very brief look at where we were gives us a better chance of seeing where we are going. And I think merits in my mind, and I remember Shulamit Aloni was in Colombia, Road to Peace, Said was in the Colombia Road to Peace, and many others were in New York at that very important meeting in my mind. I thought of merits as being the Israeli popular expression of those Israelis who wanted peace with the Palestinians. And I saw merits in this light much more than any other internal Israeli light, as to where to stand, left or right. How is your analysis of the role of the government, ownership, taxation, social justice, and all of that. That's entirely your business. But I saw in merits an expression of those Israelis who thought that the primacy of peace with the Palestinians is such that it should color a party that tries to drive the Israeli wagon towards that peace with the Palestinians as a matter of absolute strategic necessity for both Israelis and Palestinians, for the livelihood of, and the future of Israelis and Palestinians in this. I think that the late Yitzhak Rabin gradually came to believe in that. I've seen, I was very close to Rabin during the period before we signed the Oslo Agreement, and he just survived a year and a half after signing the agreement. But during this period, I saw how he himself had changed towards a much more fundamental belief in a two democratic state solution. I insist on democratic because I think if you change two democratic states into one Jewish state and one Islamic ideology state, we are in trouble. That is really the description of who we are. We are secular people who believe in Islam. I'm sure you believe in your religion, but we have a secular program for Palestine and a democratic program for Palestine. I think that's something I just emphasized. Our solution for Palestine also rests with our internal belief in democracy and a secular definition of how the citizens view their future constitutionally, politically, and in every other way. We believe in unity too. We don't misunderstand that. We don't think that it's possible to continue the Palestinian future without a united Palestine and a united Palestinians. Between the people, there's no question, but between the leaders, this has to go through the ballot box. We'd like the Palestinians to decide how they would like to be governed and what their internal future would be, because that will also define their future in Israel. And we hope that you play the same role in Israel, given what's really going on. We went through, and I think if you calculate the rate of progress between 1992 and 1996, there was real progress. We really believed we were there, that peace was at hand. We believed it in every way, politically, economically, in every other way. And I was with Yasser Arafat when he called the King of Morocco after the signing of the agreement in the White House, persuading him to receive Yitzhak Rabin on his way back from Washington as a symbol, not only of Palestinian-Israeli peace, but of Arab acceptance of that Israeli-Palestinian peace. I was with Yasser Arafat when he called the president of Indonesia, preparing for a visit by Rabin out to Indonesia, again to break through the impasse about Israeli-Islamic relations. And I know how important it was for us. I don't know many of you who were in the Casablanca conference immediately after Oslo, and then in the Amman conference that followed, a week after which Rabin was assassinated. But in that conference, the first agreement about energy was signed initially between Israel and Qatar at the time, and other Arab countries who promised to deliver gas through pipelines to Israel. That was in 1995. And so the fruits of peace were coming. And we worked very hard to do that. That is to translate a Palestinian-Israeli peace into an Arab Palestinian-Israeli peace. And I don't have to, again, remind you of the past, but it was Abu Mazen and I who went on the invitation of then Crown Prince Abdullah in Saudi Arabia to work on formulating the Arab peace process. He really just invited the two of us and Amr Musa in order to prepare for launching his Arab peace process, which Abu Mazen really totally embodied and worked for in order to translate a Palestinian-Israeli peace into an Arab and Islamic acceptance and normalization. I believe that there was many of the Israelis, not only Mr. Yitzhak Rabin, but even some people in his government, as well as in the Knesset, as well as in the public, that accepted that this is what we have to work for the survival of our two people. And I don't want to name names, but I must, because he was my partner who worked with me on implementing every item of that peace process, General Nabil Shaath. He was an army man, he was not an ideologue, but the amount of energy, commitment, and determination he showed to get this peace working was phenomenal. And if any of you see him, I haven't seen him in some time, I know he's sick, he's not in very good health. Please give him my very best regard. But there were people who really dedicated themselves to translating the vision into reality. And then Rabin was assassinated in November of 1995. And I remember telling Yasser Arafat, who was standing, he fell on his chair and said, and I quote, "I'm afraid today the peace have died." Now, we tried very hard. 7 years after the assassination, 4 of them with Mr. Netanyahu wasting every minute possible in reaching the process. And I've seen how things really were very difficult to move. We started building an independent Palestinian authority. We started building industrial zone, a harbor, an airport, a set of legal structures. We started really implementing democracy. There were presidential elections, legislative elections, and local elections very early particularly for a country that had not yet become a full sovereign state. And then came the failure of Camp David, and with the failure of Camp David, the march of Mr. Sharon over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then the explosion of the Intifada, and then bloody confrontation maybe for 2 years, and you know the history. But 10 years have passed since the Intifada, and since then. 10 years. And where are we? We are neither in peace nor in the peace process. You remember there were many people who were, including me, who were saying we want peace, not just a process. And people like Dennis Ross and others just wanted a process, just interested in keeping the process going, maybe forever. But the importance is to maintain the process. I hated the word for a while. But I tell you, nothing is left of that process, but nothing is left of the peace that we all work so hard to achieve. And sometimes it bothers me when people talk about the Palestinians don't want to negotiate. My God, I have started my negotiations with Israelis and with Jewish Americans and Europeans standing for Israelis when it was illegal since 1969. But before that, I was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Finance, and 80% of my students and colleagues were Jewish Americans, and we talked about nothing but peace in Palestine. And the ideas that developed during this time, affected my life for a very long time after that. And that includes Abu Mazen, he was the man in charge of continuing, despite all attacks on him personally. After the Columbia, I was put on the top of the assassination list of Abu Dhabi, just immediately after the Columbia conference. We felt that was the road. But that really is not there anymore. Your Labour Party, which was at one time a partner, a serious partner in the peace process, the party for Rabin, after all, today is at best ready to talk about social justice in Israel, not about a two-state policy, not about peace, not about anything. There's so much that has happened since that the process has changed totally from a democratic Israeli state to a Jewish Israeli state, meaning de-Arabization of as much of the West Bank as possible, de-Palestinianization as much as possible, particularly in Jerusalem. A process of deepening occupation, a process of widening occupation through the settlement program, a process of ending, literally, the meaning, cultural, spiritual, political, in any way, of a part of Jerusalem that is Palestinian, that is Arab. And really, you can see this process in so many ways: the inflammatory statements, the obstruction of rights of worship, the continuing facilitation of settler raids on the Haram Sharif, the advocacy of the serious cuts to depopulate Jerusalem, nothing like whatever happened since 1967, the continued expansion of illegal settlements inside Jerusalem, the renewal, inside East Jerusalem, the renewal of closure of Jerusalem institutions, the unilateral policies of occupation in every way of life in East Jerusalem, building restrictions and home demolitions, taking away residence rights of Palestinians for all varieties of reasons, and continuing the wall building. All of these are just signs of what is going on. What Mr. Netanyahu wants is the process now just as a cover. Come to the negotiating table, sit with me. I will produce nothing while I continue to build settlements, while I continue to depopulate East Jerusalem, while I continue to make it so hard for you to ever have a serious, democratic, viable state side by side with the state. And